This is the Read, Write, and Create podcast, the podcast where you get a bite-sized session of creative writing coaching from me, Lori L. Tharps. I'm a storytelling evangelist who moved to the south of Spain so I could live a global literary life. I'm also an award-winning author of both fiction and nonfiction, a journalist, and a former college professor. I created this podcast because I want to help as many BIPOC writers as possible get their stories out of their heads and into the world. Are you ready? Let's go. On episode 41 of the podcast, I'm going to be giving you a quick but important pep talk about your reading habit because I'm afraid you might be doing it all wrong. You see, writers need an intentional reading habit, not just a reading hobby. I'm going to break down the difference between the two and then share 5 easy steps to cultivate a reading habit that I promise will make you a better writer. Let's get into it. Hello, wordsmiths, storytellers, and scribes. Welcome back to the show. I hope your writing is going well, and I hope you're feeling positive and motivated to keep putting pen to paper and getting your writing into the world. Now, I'm not going to lie. I'm recording this episode on November 5th, 2024. It is evening here in Spain, but it's only early afternoon in the United States, so the polls for the presidential election are still wide open, and there is a collective sense of fear about who is going to win. So maybe you're not feeling so positive and motivated to be putting pen to paper. You know, I almost thought about not putting out an episode right now because I just got back from my whirlwind trip to the United States last night. I'm really tired, and because of the election, I'm also a bag of nerves. But then I thought about my mission for this show. And that mission is to help as many BIPOC writers as possible get their stories into the world because I really and truly believe that storytelling told by BIPOC writers has the potential and the power to change the world. That's why I'm a storytelling evangelist. And those are just the facts as I see them. So if the orange dusted Cheeto becomes president, God help us, we're going to need your voices and your stories more than ever. And if Miss Kamala Harris wins, which will be a celebration in my book, we will still need your stories. And that's why I hit record so I can keep doing my part on making this a better world for all of us. And I hope you, my fellow scribes, keep doing your part because the world needs your stories. So on that note, let's talk about how cultivating a solid reading habit will help you write better stories. All right, so to begin, I'm going to start with this very famous James Baldwin quote that offers a winning formula for literary greatness. It goes like this, quote, read, read, read. Never stop reading. And when you can't read anymore, write, unquote. Sounds pretty easy, doesn't it? I mean, that methodology worked for Uncle Jimmy. James Baldwin never officially attended writing classes. He never got an MFA. Instead, he said that he, quote, read himself out of 2 libraries in Harlem, unquote, before he turned 13. And then he continued to, quote, learn how to write, unquote, throughout his prolific literary career just by reading. So obviously, it's not surprising that writers should be reading in order to improve their craft. But what may come as a surprise is how much work it actually takes to develop and stick to a regular reading habit rather than just a reading hobby or reading for pleasure. Let me break that down for you. What do I mean by a difference between a reading habit and a reading hobby? I mean, to a certain extent, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. All of you I know as writers always have known that you need to be voracious readers. In fact, I would guess that most of us writers were readers first. We fell in love with the written word as children, and then somewhere along the line decided that we too wanted to make magic on the page. I know some of you were not voracious readers as children. Maybe the bug for reading didn't happen until adolescence or maybe even later, but it usually does begin with the reading of books that leads us to the writing of books. But there's a huge difference when we read, again, as pleasure versus habit. And I think most of us, even us writers, we start reading and we keep reading because it actually gives us immense pleasure. I mean, it's all part of the ecosystem of what we do, right? The reading gives us pleasure, the writing gives us pleasure, and we select books to read based on our interests and likes. We read books by authors whose prose goes down easy or maybe whose storylines excite us. We read books because they offer an easy form of escape. Maybe it's a cheaper version of therapy. And books can obviously teach us about new things we want to learn. And in today's influencer mad world, some of us are reading because the TikTok girlies make it sound so cool. And I mean, honestly, it has become a social trend lately with book clubs and book parties and even book tourism becoming all the rage. And this form of reading that people are doing kind of publicly these days, I would call it hobby reading. Even if we keep track of the books we read on apps like StoryMap or Goodreads, and we diligently attend our monthly book club, the impetus for our reading really is mostly pleasure. And we don't have any rules or regulations or specific purpose to the things we read. Now, don't get me wrong. Let me underline this in red pen. There is no shame or no problem at all with this type of reading. Reading for pleasure should not be demonized, and I am by no means saying that we should not read for pleasure. What I'm saying is that if you are a writer, you need to have a reading habit or a reading practice, which means you're reading with intention so that you actually become a better writer. A reading habit, let me say it again, is having a reading practice that comes with regularity and purpose. You keep track of what you read and why. You reflect on what you read and you contextualize it as both story and craft. And most importantly, your reading has a direct influence and purpose on your growth as a writer. That's the difference. So it's not an impulse based on pleasure. It's a habit that is propelled by purpose. Now, the first thing you have to do to cultivate a reading habit as a writer, and again, I am speaking to the writers listening. That's my audience. That's who I'm talking to. That's who the pep talk is for. This is for writers who want to become better writers, published writers. So to cultivate a reading habit as a writer, the first thing you have to do is simply acknowledge the importance of reading for your writing practice. If you are not reading with intention and purpose, there's no actual benefit to your writing practice. I know that sounds harsh, but it's really true. Just because you read voraciously doesn't mean that what you're reading is actually making a noticeable impact on the craft of your writing. The lessons that we learn aren't learned through osmosis. In other words, if you're not reading with purpose and with the steps that I'm going to outline next, then again, you're just reading for pleasure and nothing wrong with it, but we want you to actually improve with every book you read as part of your reading habit. So let me break down what does a reading habit look like and how you can cultivate a reading habit as a writer if you don't have one right now. And let me just say, I would not be surprised if you didn't have a reading habit right now, because this is not something that people teach you. Even when you go to an MFA program or you go to writing classes, people often say you should read, but without giving you like step-by-step instructions as to how to read like a writer, how to read with the idea of cultivating a reading practice. So here we go, steps 1 through 5. 1, after you have already acknowledged the importance of reading, that's the mental work we have to do first. But the actual step-by-step, first thing you need to do is invest in a tracking system for your reading practice. Personally, I like to use notebooks and handwriting for this type of tracking, but if you love your technology, it's fine. figure out spreadsheets, tracking apps, or other forms of online organizing that you need. I mean, you can just do it on a Microsoft Word or Google Docs, whatever, but you need some way to keep track of what it is you are reading and why. This is not a Goodreads tracker or a Story Maps or something like that, because those apps pretty much just give you a title and someplace where you can write your little public review and some stars, but this is not that. So don't think about Goodreads or Story Maps. I mean, again, I love some of those apps, not Goodreads, but Story Maps, but this is not the same thing. Again, you figure out once I share some of the next steps, what kinds of information you're going to be tracking, but that's the first thing you need to do is to actually have a receptacle for tracking your reading habit. Number 2, create specific reading goals. So just as we usually sit down and plan out our goals for what writing projects we want to accomplish over a certain period of time, we should also plan out our reading goals. So in your notebook, whether that's a digital one or a paper one, decide how many and what specific books you want to read over a certain period of time and why. You should consider this, I mean, you don't have to do it this way, but this is just an example. Like you could consider this as a quarterly assignment. For example, I gave myself 6 books to read in quarter 4. Normally, I give myself 4 books to read. I can read a little bit more than 1 book a month. So that's what I usually do. But because I was going to be traveling in quarter 4, knowing I was going to be on airplanes and trains, I threw 2 extra books in there because I know I would have all this extra time to read. Now, the idea of setting specific reading goals is not about forcing yourself to read a large number of books like the bookstagrammers out here on Beyonce's internet are doing. There's this habit of like, oh, I have to read 100 books this year. No, you don't. Not as a reader who's reading as a writer. This is about being thoughtful about building your craft as a writer, and you should be selecting books that are going to help you, not just I have to read as much as possible, because you're not getting anything out of that as a writer. You know, it's like notches on your belt. So you want to think about what books you want to read this quarter that are going to help you in your writing practice. So maybe you want to read 3 new books that are in conversation with your next book project for inspiration. Or maybe you want to read some books that use first-person POV really well because that's something you struggle with. Maybe you want to read books that cover a certain time period or theme that your next book is going to take place in that same time period, for example. Or maybe you simply want to read some recent bestsellers to see what people are interested in these days. Basically, the choices are endless, but the key is to create a book list for yourself to read with a specific purpose. And again, that purpose should connect with whatever your writing purpose is at this time. So the point is to know what you're reading and why, and then to give yourself a solid deadline and a schedule for each title so that you become accountable to your goals and you are reading with intention rather than as an afterthought. What I mean by that is if you tell yourself, I'm going to read these 3 or 4 books in quarter 4, that means I'm going to read book 1 from October 1st till October 21st. Maybe you give yourself 3 weeks per book. And that means that you're going to have to read, I don't know, break the book up, 5 chapters a week or something like that. That also means that you're not going to just read before you fall asleep at night, because that type of reading doesn't really get you the type of results that we want you to have. You have to be figuring out when you can read, ideally in daytime hours, when you can really pay attention to whatever the purpose is, what craft elements you're looking at, the information you want to extract from the work. By giving yourself a specific deadline and a schedule, it will force you to read, paying more attention to the times you're reading and not just, I call it dirty reading. In other words, reading right before bed when I can only read like 2 sentences before falling asleep, and I'm definitely not picking up on the nuances and the craft elements that I want to. And you will really be amazed by how much more you can read when you don't just wait to read at the end of the day or, right before you go to bed. All right, number 3, be an active reader. So reading with purpose is different than reading just for story. If you have a specific reason for reading, then you will be reading with a more critical eye. As an active reader, you should be paying close attention to the work of the writer. Now, of course, sometimes the book is just too good and you fall into the story, forgetting about everything you promised to look out for. And that's okay. That's a good thing. Then you know it's a really good book. When we read like a writer, sometimes we have to read a book twice, which is why there's no gold star for saying, oh, I'm going to read 100 books, because that's not what we're going for. We're not going for quantity. We're doing for quality. So you may read the book once for the story, and then you can return to the pages looking at the craft elements. If the book belongs to you as you read, you might underline passages, mark pages, make notes in the margins to remind yourself of the things that you want to look at over again and study on that second read. And again, the second read might not be the whole book over again, but wherever you've marked, made notes, you can go back to those pages and see whatever was your purpose for reading, what it is you're looking at. So number 3 was be an active reader. Number 4, reflect and record. When you finished reading, you use your notebook to reflect on your feelings about the book. I like to say I will write a review for myself, and that review should incorporate the reasons why I chose to read that book in the first place. You know, if I was reading for first-person POV elements, I might write about whether they were good, what worked, what the author did, really looking at the craft elements and making note of what was executed really well. And if there were things that you thought were not executed well, write those down too. Give a full review for yourself. The reason you're doing this is because you're essentially in your notebook, you're creating your own textbook to come back to again and again for your own writing practice by noting what it is you liked, what the author did well, what maybe things you learned. It could be craft or just content. You're putting it all in a space where it's like you're creating your own craft textbook. All of that's in there. And then when people say you read to become a better writer, you really have extracted the lessons that you needed from that book. I also like to record how long it took me to read the book, because that's just great for my own like habit tracking to see how much time it's taken me to read certain books and why. And borrowing an idea from the bullet journaling community, I highly suggest you create an index for your notebook. So when you're done with it, you can easily look back on that notebook and see what books are covered in that notebook. So I'm reading 6 books in this quarter. So the notebook I'm using right now, I can look back at the index, which I will put, on the last page, and it'll say, I read Color Television by Danzy Senna. I read Devil is Fine. These 4 books that are actually 6 books that I'll have finished by the end of quarter 4. And I'll be able to see not only what titles, but the general kind of summary of my takeaway for those books were. So again, when I'm looking back and I want to think, oh, what did I think or what did I learn in Color Television? I can find that notebook and go back to it. Last but not least, don't forget to celebrate every book you finish with a sticker or some kind of mini celebration in your notebook. So again, you can just remember and remind yourself that reading, even though you're reading like a writer, is still for pleasure. There's still fun involved. And finally, find a reading buddy or community. So it goes without saying that you do not need a partner to read. You do not need to be in a book club to read like a writer. But as I just mentioned, it's always great if you can make all processes and all parts of your literary life more enjoyable, and that often happens in community. It's great if you can have somebody to discuss your recent reads with, but beware of the basic book club, my friends. Book clubs are great for reading hobbyists, but for your reading habit, I highly recommend finding a book club made up of writers like the one we have in the Read, Write, Create Sanctuary, where we read select books on certain craft elements, and then our discussions are about the story and the craft. Right now, we're reading The Man Who Could Move Clouds by Ingrid Rojas Contreras to study the fiction elements that she used in her immersive memoir. And Ingrid is actually going to be joining us for our craft discussion when we meet. Now, you may not have a book club of writers to join, but you could just find a reading buddy who is also a writer who can engage with conversation with you about the book from multiple perspectives, again, as both reader and writer. And once you start speaking aloud with other writers about the books you read, you can add to your own learning, because obviously they're going to bring in different perspectives and ideas as both reader and writer, which is what you want. And of course, whatever discussions that you have with your reading community or your reading buddy, you can add those to your notebook as extra learnings that you got from the book. And again, I think doing all of our literary stuff in community is just great. It's always good to have somebody else to kiki with about the books you read and really just get into that conversation as what this book is offering to reader and writer. And that's my final point, is that having a reading habit should not feel like homework. It should still be filled with fun and joy, like the rest of your writing life. At the end of the day, I want your reading to bring you pleasure, because otherwise, seriously, what's the point? I mean, if the reading becomes tedious, then I don't want you to put that on yourself. But having a reading habit, I don't want you to think that it means you have to read the so-called classics to learn your craft. You must read the books that call to your soul and that you know will elevate your practice and craft as a writer. So, for example, if you really are struggling with dialogue, get those books where the dialogue is really good. If you want to write witchy genre fiction, then honey, grab all the witchy books and start reading those. Put those on your list. If romance is your jam, same goes for you. I mean, reading Steinbeck or Ta-Nehisi Coates for that matter, it's not going to help you write a better meet-cute romance novel. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't read wider than your specific genre. Doesn't mean you can't challenge yourself to read, like, for example, if you're doing those witchy genre fiction books, you can still read nonfiction about the history of witchcraft or maybe about medicinal plants, so your witchy books are infused with realistic elements that elevate your novels. If you are a memoirist, that doesn't mean you might not want to also read some first-person fiction to learn some good storytelling techniques. So again, read widely, but let your own interest and desires to improve be your guide. So, final thoughts. Remember, you are in charge of crafting your own reading curriculum. You get to create your reading lists or syllabi, if you will, based on your needs and desires as a writer. If you remember to read with purpose, have clear goals, and reflect and record everything you read, then you will develop a strong reading habit that I promise will make you a better writer. Here are some final benefits that will come from developing a reading habit instead of a reading hobby. 1, you will learn new craft elements. 2, you will improve your vocabulary. 3, you will learn more about different people, places, and things. 4, you will be inspired to try different formats for your storytelling. And number 5, bonus, if you read the acknowledgments page of every book you read, you will also learn who are the movers and shakers in the publishing world, which will help you get published in the future. That is a pro tip. You're welcome. I hope this quick pep talk has inspired you to develop your own reading habit. And if you don't believe me, believe James Baldwin. Read, read, read. Never stop reading. And when you can't read anymore, write. All right, everyone. I hope this helped. Stay inspired. I'm hoping for all good things after this election for your stories to keep coming out into the world. Thanks. If you're looking for more inspiration and information to optimize your writing life, then visit the Read, Write, and Create website. That's at readwriteandcreate.com. Don't forget, that's REED, writeandcreate.com. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for our bi-monthly newsletter to get writing inspiration and resources right in your inbox. Links for both are in the show notes. Also, now, the doors are closed right now for the Read, Write, and Create Sanctuary. We're not taking any new members right now. But if you are a BIPOC woman writer who takes their writing seriously, you can still add your name to our waiting list, so you'll be the first to know when we start taking new applications next. The link to the waiting list is also in the show notes. Finally, if you're looking for an easy opportunity to see your words published and you want your words to make an impact in the world, how about if you write a review of this podcast on Apple Podcasts? I mean, it's an easy ask and it's a win-win for everyone. Thank you in advance. The Read, Write, Create podcast is produced by me, Lori L. Tharps. Our editor is Brad Linder, and our theme music is by Wataboy. Until next time, scribes, keep writing. The world needs more BIPOC stories by BIPOC storytellers like you.